Welcome back, listeners, to the Hacking Autism podcast, the podcast all about leveraging autism as your unfair advantage. Today, I am joined once again by my friend Ashley, and we are going to talk about active and passive touch. When we first met each other, we had a lovely meal together at an awesome Chinese restaurant, Tea House in Minneapolis. For any local listeners, you should check it out. But what I remember about that conversation is how we discussed active and passive touch. Can you help the listener understand how that conversation began?
That conversation began with you telling me about your dream to do the Autism podcast.
Sure.
And how that was speaking over your life, that you wanted to impact that community of people.
Sure.
And you wanted to empower that community of people and create a business and employ that community of people because of their certain strengths.
Sure.
And I was like, oh, that's really amazing, because my son is unofficially diagnosed with very high functioning autism. I guess Asperger's is no longer a technical term.
But we'll still use it.
We will. So he calls himself Aspie, and I just looking back on him as, you know, a mother raising a child. You want to hold your baby, you want to touch your baby, you want them to come to you and run to you after school and and scoop them up in your arms, and it's a little bit different for him, because if it was his idea for touch or for contact, physical contact, then he was all in 110%.
It was great.
Snuggle bug. But if you asked him or demanded of him, you know, come give me a hug, and he just wasn't into it, then it was like pulling teeth.
Sure.
And I'm like, okay, are you just, you know, shy or what's going on? Or is it...
Or are you being a punk right now?
Yeah, or are you just having an attitude? And this would happen frequently with my grandmother. She would demand this physical attention from him and be very offended and very upset and make a huge deal and almost embarrass him.
Wow.
Because, you know, he just wasn't into, you know, having this prolonged hug from grandma randomly out of the blue the second he walked in from the door after school, which was very stimulating for him. He needs his time to decompress.
Yeah.
We explained this. It was not accepted. So all that stuff was kind of talked about when we first met. And then you brought up the active and passive touch, which I had never heard of before, but it instantly clicked, like, that's my son.
So for those not familiar with that concept, I learned this from my counselor. This idea of active and passive touch. Active touch is often when someone reaches out and gives you a hug, or they, Lord forbid, give you a neck massage, or they want to hold your hand. They are initiating it, and it can often be overwhelming, overstimulating. But then there's passive touch, which I would categorize as my husband putting his hand underneath my thigh. That is an acceptable thing, which is like minimal pressure. I don't have to do anything back. I can just receive that he's trying to love on me in that moment. Or if someone's sitting shoulder to shoulder, I would consider that passive touch. Or if your knees are touching, those are situations that, in my mind, I don't really have to opt in a great deal. But that person who's not on the spectrum can feel loved, can feel connected to me. And so there were these two different categories, active and passive touch, that my counselor had challenged me to break up or decouple in my mind what things fall into which category, so that I could still be a person that interacted and loved others well. That, you know, if my husband's love language is touch, well, how do I bridge the gap in that situation? So we were discussing, you had mentioned your son, you know, he doesn't really like hugs. And so then we broke that down. And once you heard my definition or breakdown of active and passive touch, what shifted in your mind, or what did you do next?
Well, I kind of just changed the way that I, was aware of touch. And then especially with my son, like I was like, okay, well, let's leave him in control because I want to hug. I'm the mom. I just, I want to hug my son.
Of course.
So I'm like, hey, come here, give me a hug. Nope. That's me demanding something from him that he might not be feeling at that moment. So what I did is I just flipped the dialogue around. I'm like, you know what would be so awesome right now, Bruce? A Bruce hug. And then it was like he had this mighty control and empowerment, like that he could give me this gifting of his, physical touch and embrace. And they were always the most intense, warm, amazing hugs. And it was so different than just like a casual hug. Like it was really him loving on me instead of just agreeing into the hug. So it was also empowering for him because he was in control and that he thought of himself as able to
help
provide me with something that I need that only he can fill.
Yep.
So it was amazing, the turnaround for that. So that's something that I shared with the rest of the family that we've implemented that has impacted him greatly.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. It's really been a good thing. And also with his little brother to kind of help understand, because little brothers, they want to fight and hit and kick. And a lot of times,
wrestle with each
and
other.
if you're on the spectrum, that overstimulation
can sometimes be too much.
It's too much, and then you lash out, and then you're hitting little brother. And then it's like, you don't need to hurt him, but, stop. So it kind of, helped negate a lot of those situations as well. But it was very... very interesting in my marriage as well.
You applied that lesson to yourself?
I did. I implemented that to myself. I explained it with my husband.
And how was that received? How did you unpack that new concept to someone that's like, well, touch is touch, whatever?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of explained it, and I think it's an odd thing for me because being on the spectrum, but then touch is also one of my love languages.
Sure. How do you wrestle and reconcile that?
Yeah, that's almost like two opposing tides in yourself.
Sure.
So, and that's why I think I was able to word that differently with my son about the hug. Because I'm like, okay, I know that it's important for you to have that physical contact with your mom, but it needs to be on your terms and your idea. Yeah. It's important for me to give and receive that to you. So how do we make that work where we can both get that input and, that need met? So I kind of bled that over into my marriage as well.
And so did you say, sweetheart, there are two types of touch, active, passive. How did the conversation take shape? Just how did you introduce it? And
I just said that, hey, I had this really amazing conversation about, physical contact that really made a poignant, mark in my life. And I want to talk about this with you and what it means. And I want to just, try to do things a little differently and see how, that helps or hinders. And so we did do things a little differently. But giving me that space, and then there's like markers that we would use with each other, like, okay.
Like cues? Yeah.
Yes. So there was cues, and, I don't want you just, touchy. But I do, I'll take that neck massage.
Sure.
But you got to wait till I tell you. Yep. But I tell you that now's the time. Neck massages are okay. Or do not touch my neck right now. So, it was kind of a rough thing to go through and navigate.
Was it well received? In terms of like, okay, this is the code, this is why it matters.
It was well received, but implementation was extremely challenging.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you have a life together,
after 12 years, at the time, 13 years of marriage, it was like, but it gave him clarification of like why sometimes things were so well received, and then other times it's like, just
horrible idea.
Get away, just please go over there. Yep. Give it my space. So it was an enlightening thing, for sure, but it was, I say, more so invaluable to the relationship with my son, because we both have that love languages touch and that easily overloaded spectrum issue with touch.
Sure. Now, what would your advice be to others listening to this podcast, trying to broach that subject with someone that's significant in their life, with a parent, with a friend, in terms of like, hey, when is too much too much? How do you establish those signals? How do you bring it up?
I mean, you just have to be pretty blatantly honest. And to be honest, it's not going to be very well received by a few people that you're going to be talking about this to.
Sure, and you're asking them to change.
And you have to be prepared for that, because there are some people who might be,
old
for
school.
whatever reason, narcissistic or very insecure or demanding people in your life that might be extremely offended and might be very, hurt because you're asking for respect, of a thing in your life, and they take that as an offense. So there's that dynamic that is going to come up.
Sure.
With certain people more than others. Usually it's a family member. Usually it's somebody a little older generation.
Sure.
People that are taught, well, that's just manners to go up and hug grandma when you walk in the door. And then there's the one kid that never wants to hug grandma, and that kid's in trouble all the time because they're being rude to grandma, and grandma's feelings are hurt. So it's important to just be very honest and say, hey, this is how I feel about touch. These are the things that we can do to navigate touch between the two of us. And this is what needs to happen for us both to get the most out of the relationship with our touch and respect for each other. It's nothing to do with you personally. This is just simply the way God made me and how I'm comfortable living in the world of touch. And bring up things like the cues, different timings. Like, hey, when I walk in the door, give me a few minutes. Don't just
priceless.
Don't just come and smother me all over with the heavy perfume and oh Lord, okay. It could be very, very overwhelming. So just that, hey, let me walk in the door, greet each other, give me 5 minutes, and then we can get settled in and have that time, for a hug or some kind of embrace or sitting next to each other, and you can put your hand on my knee, and ask me how I'm doing. Blatant honesty. It's not going to be well received by all, but for the most part, people will be so relieved that you're
just to get clarity.
That you're explaining why this is a thing for you, and that why that mixed message of, oh, well, they don't like me, or something about me puts them off. Nope, it's just my weird touch thing. So here's what we're going to do about it. Here's the solution. Here's something we can try. Let's fix it. It wasn't you, and it's not me either. It's just simply the way it is. So let's navigate it and have healthy relationships out of respect. So just be prepared for the few people that aren't going to be so receptive of that.
Well, and what you said reminded me of my conversation with Tyler, to my husband, to basically create those markers of like, okay, when is it a good time to give a hug or not a good time to give a hug? And Deb, my mentor, said, well, what if you had something silly like knocking on a table or knocking on wood, like just, and basically that is a signal to me that my husband would like to hug me, which is every bit his right to hug me. And I can quickly shake my head no and say, no, not the time. Or I can be like, yep, I would love a Tyler bear hug. And or I joke that he's my Temple Grandin squeeze machine, because like he gives very firm hugs. And so he'll knock on the dash of our car, he'll knock on our countertop to say, I would love some touch. Is now a good time? And that's really made a world of difference. And if I say no, then sometimes he'll, if we're driving the car, he'll put the hand underneath the thigh, because that's passive touch instead of active touch. And it's made a world of difference. So I hope that you guys consider and reflect, what are markers that you could implement in your own life, or who do you need to have this conversation with, where it really could make a world of difference in loving them well, and in turn receiving love from them. So consider that. If you guys have made it this far, thank you so much. Consider hitting that subscribe button or leaving us a review. Would love to hear back. What did you guys think? With that, we'll catch you guys next time.